Some of you have asked how I achieve my desired look when color grading my videos, and today I'll be showing you exactly how I would do so using a plugin called Dehancer Pro. Dehancer is a film emulation software designed to accurately replicate the analog characteristics of film. It's available for various photo and video editing softwares such as Davinci Resolve, Adobe Premiere, Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, and more. Dehancer also gives you access to effects such as halation, bloom, film grain, overscan, and many others, while allowing you to achieve the look of iconic film stocks such as Kodak Vision 3, Portra 400, CineStill 800, and many more. Now, for those of you who don't know, I've typically relied on a combination of Sir Villasano's Film Vision Power Grade and Joel Familaro's Phantom LUTs to create the cinematic look that I love for all my previous projects, including the ones on this YouTube channel. But I've always wondered what unique value Dehancer might bring to the table that these other plugins and LUTs might not. Can someone who might be a little inexperienced or new to color grading, like myself, pick it up and use it effectively, or will I simply set it aside and return to my old ways? To help answer these questions, Dehancer kindly provided me with a copy of the plugin to test and share my honest opinions. I'm not receiving any payment for this, so you'll be getting my genuine, unbiased thoughts throughout this run-through. But of course, as a little disclaimer, I am not a professional colorist in any way. I still have a lot to learn, but this channel is about documenting progress. So while my approach to editing and color grading may be a bit untraditional at this time, I hope you'll find inspiration or value in seeing my process at least. If you do decide to give Dehancer a try for yourself, you can use my promo code that you see right here. This code applies to all Dehancer products, whether you decide to go with their pro version of the plugin or their more specific and budget-friendly options, such as Dehancer Light, Dehancer Film Grain, and more. Now, without further ado, let's find out if Dehancer Pro lives up to the hype. So as you can see, I've already drag and dropped all the footage that I want to use for this demonstration today. This was all shot on a Sony FX3 using a Sigma 24-70mm art lens version 1, and I also used some macro filters from Amazon. I'll drop everything that I used in these shots down in the description if you're interested. But the first thing I like to do before I start color grading is to make sure my timeline color space settings are correctly configured so that anything that I'm editing today in Davinci translates correctly onto my final export and its final destination, which in this case is going to be YouTube, and more specifically for viewers who might be watching on their devices such as an iPhone or an iPad. So what I'll do is go to the bottom right of Davinci, open up this gear icon, go to my color management settings, and I usually set my color science to Davinci YRGB, timeline color space to Davinci wide gamut / intermediate, and output color space to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. Be aware, these settings are not one size fits all. I had to do a lot of trial and error to figure out which settings work best for me and my setup, which in this case I use a MacBook M1 Pro in clamshell mode and a BenQ PD3225U set to Rec 709 for when I'm color grading. I have seen some people set their output color space to Rec 709A or Gamma 2.4, Gamma 2.2 as well. Do your own tests and see which settings might be best for your setup. Now we can close out of here and we can go to the top left, Davinci Resolve Preferences, and I'll open my General tab, and I purposefully make sure that Use Mac Display Color Profiles for Viewers is unselected. For the same reason, I just did a bunch of tests and found that leaving this unselected gives me the best results. So we'll come down here and save, and we'll go down to our Color tab, and we can see our empty node graph. What I'm gonna do now is convert this log footage into Rec 709. Now, there are a couple different ways you can do this using either a conversion LUT or Davinci's color space transform tool, but you can also do it in Dehancer as well. I'm going to show you how I prefer to do it with Davinci's color space transform tool, and then I will show you Dehancer's way. So what I'm going to do is add a couple nodes here. Call this one CST in. This will be white balance and Dehancer and CST out. So I'm going to add a color space transform tool into this first node. And basically for the input settings, I just put whatever my settings were for the camera I used. So in this case, sgamut3.cine, slog3, and we'll do Davinci wide gamut and Davinci intermediate. Now we can hold down Option and drag this onto our last node, retitle it CST out, and then we can swap. And basically now our input settings are going to be wide gamut and intermediate. We're going to set our output color space to Rec 709 and output gamma to gamma 2.4. And there you have it. As you can see, now we have a properly converted Rec 709 image. Next, what I'm going to do is adjust my white balance real quick. And I'm no white balance expert, so I usually just use this little picker tool and I try to find a neutral area, which in this case is gonna be my veiny eyeball. So it made it a little bit green, so I'm just gonna eyeball it, and bring it back to the magenta side a bit, maybe bring back some warmth, because it was a sunny day. This is our before and this is our after. Now we can go into Dehancer and you can find it under the Effects tab, scroll all the way down to Film Emulation and drag and drop onto your desired node and you are in business. So as you can see, Dehancer likes to automatically make adjustments to my image, which I'm not too fond of. So what we can do is scroll all the way down to the plugin where it says disable all tools. And now we are back to our converted Rec 709 image. And while we're here, I'm gonna change my quality to high slow. If you have a computer that might not be able to handle more processing power, you can select the normal fast option and then switch it to high slow right before you export. Now I'm gonna scroll all the way back up to our input section and let me actually close all these. So now remember, I mentioned that you can convert your footage into Rec 709 using Dehancer. Well, I'm gonna show you how to do that. So we're gonna disable our CSTs real quick. So now we are back to our log image and we can now use Dehancer's conversion tool. So under source, we can select choose camera and Sony camera is a Sony FX3 and format as scamet3.cine. And now, as you can see, we have a pretty nicely converted Rec 709 image. So if you didn't want to use CSTs, this is always an option. But I do prefer the versatility of using CSTs, so I'm actually going to go back and set this as Davinci wide gamut / intermediate and enable my CSTs again. And then what we can do is actually grab a still of this image, and basically what it's doing is saving this entire setup as a preset so that all this other footage that we still have to edit, we can simply apply grade and we already have all of our input settings and conversions done for us. We don't have to keep doing it for every single clip manually. So now we can get started with color grading in Dehancer. So the first thing I like to adjust is my film profile, and this is basically going to be the film stock that you're emulating. Right now this is Kodak Vision 3 250D, which looks a little crazy, but I do have over 60 different options to choose from here. So we have options ranging from Agfa, CineStill, Fuji options, Kodak options, and there's also a couple black and white options in there like Ilford HP5. In this case, I usually like to select my film profile based off of what my shooting conditions were. As we know, if we were shooting in a brighter condition, we'd probably have a lower ISO or lower rated film stock. And if it was a darker condition, we'd probably be shooting in a higher ISO or a higher rated film stock. So in this case, I'm gonna choose Kodak Vision 3 50D. Now we can mess with this push-pull slider, which is basically emulating how film can be pushed or pulled. If you're unfamiliar, that's basically when somebody shoots film at a different ISO than what it's actually rated for. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna move it towards the left, and I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing I'll adjust is my print profile. There are several different options to choose from here, but I prefer the Kodak 2383 print film and Fujifilm 3513 option. I prefer these options because it gives us access to the target white slider, and this target white slider basically acts as a temperature adjustment, which I find behaves a little bit differently than the temperature comp in the input tab, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So if we move the target white or temperature adjustment here to the left, you can see it's a very subtle adjustment. Now if we wanted to adjust temperature in the input tab, moving it all the way to the left looks like this, and then all the way to the right looks like this. Almost like Breaking Bad scenes.
Right now, we've got bigger fish to fry. And bigger fish.
So, very big difference with temperature adjustment from the print versus input tab. Same thing goes for exposure in print versus input. If I wanted to adjust my exposure in the print tab, it looks like this. And then in the input tab, you can see that the exposure increase makes the image look blown out and basically clipped. I'm gonna stick to the print tab for that reason. So I'll make some quick adjustments here. Maybe bring my temperature to the warmer side, lower my exposure a little bit, bring back some tonal contrast, color density, and this is our before and this is our after. Now I like to adjust my expand, which is gonna let me make more adjustments to my black and white point. I'll probably bring the black point up and white point. This is our before and this is our after. And let's say it's too soft, I can go up to my film developer and bring back some contrast. Probably do that. And what I do notice about when you add a film profile or a print profile is that I kind of lose some color. So what we can do in the film developer tab is also bring back some of that color. I think right there. Just kind of brings back some of the skin color. And this film developer tab is basically allowing you to create your own film development process. The next thing I'll adjust is my film compression, and this is probably one of my favorite tools in Dehancer, and it's especially useful if you have distracting highlights, for example. So I will enable it, and basically what it's doing is it's giving you that filmic look in the highlights. If you were raising exposure in a digital camera, for example, your highlights may begin to look overexposed, clipped, or blown out. Meanwhile, if you raise exposure in film, the highlights actually start to look a little bit softer, a little bit compressed and faded almost. That's basically what this film compression tool is doing. So we can adjust our impact here, our white point. This is our before and this is our after. Tonal range. All right, cool. And now we're gonna go to my color head and make further adjustments into my shadows, midtones, highlights, etc. So there's no rules here that I like to follow. I just eyeball it and decide what looks best for the mood that I'm going for. So I'm gonna keep it more towards the greenish warm side, maybe. This is our before and this is our after. Might be a little too green. Before, after, cool. And then we'll adjust my shadows. I notice my shadows look a little purple, so I'm gonna try to warm them up a little bit. Midtones and highlights. Probably right there. All right, this is our before and this is our after. And now we can get into the really fun stuff, which is gonna be like our film grain, halation, bloom, etc. And this is what's really gonna give it that filmic appearance. So we'll start with film grain. So we have presets ranging from 8mm all the way to 65mm. Now, basically, the lower your number in millimeters, the more intense the grain effect is gonna be. And the higher your number, the less of a grain effect you're gonna get. I will show you. So if we select 8mm 50, for example, you can see the grain here is very textured, it's very rough and present. Now, if we were to select the 65mm option, you can see the grain is almost unrecognizable. It's very, very subtle. Another thing to keep in mind about these options is that we get 3 different ISO options: ISO 50, 250, and 500. Now, what do we know about ISO? The lower your ISO, the less grain you're gonna see, and the higher your ISO, the more grain you're gonna see. So the same thing applies here. If we select this 8mm 50 ISO option, this is how the grain looks. And if we select the 500 ISO option, the grain becomes a lot more present and in your face. So When it comes to all these special filmic effects, I like to go for something that looks a little more natural. I don't like the halation to be too obvious or the grain to be too distracting, for example. So I'm gonna be selecting the 35mm ISO 50 option, and it gives me a very subtle grain appearance. So I'm pretty happy with this preset as it is. We can also mess with the amount slider, and I think that looks good. Now we'll add some halation, and it's definitely gonna add a little bit of that pinkish, reddish tint to my shot. One thing to note about halation is that you're gonna get two different versions of each option. For example, 8mm Super 8 option, and then you're gonna get an 8mm Super 8 no remjet option. If you're unfamiliar with film, remjet is basically the protective layer on your film that prevents halation, scratches, and static from the film. So when you select a no remjet option, you're basically removing that remjet protective layer and allowing the extra halation in. So for example, if we select a no remjet option, you can see the halation gets significantly more prominent versus if we select a option with remjet. So in this case, I'm gonna stick with the 16mm remjet option and just lower it. This is our before and this is our after. Before and after. I think it's still a little strong, so I'm actually gonna bring it up to the 35mm option. And this is our before and after. Now for bloom, same thing. The higher the number, the less prominent it's gonna be, and the lower number, the more prominent the effect is gonna be. So I'll select 65 because I don't want too much bloom in this. This is our before and this is our after. Before, after, you can really see the bloom a little bit in the eye there. Now I'm gonna add some film damage. 35. One thing to note about film damage is that when you select this amount jitter option, the film damage becomes a little bit less prominent. You can barely see it. Now, if we deselect that, you can see it a lot more. So again, I like to keep it subtle, so I'll keep amount jitter on, maybe lower my amount, and now my film damage is pretty subtle. Next thing, we'll do film breathing, and film breathing is basically gonna add some artifacts into your shot. As you can see, there's a lot of temperature changes here because of the film breathing. So I'm gonna lower this down to 35 and put it halfway. We'll go down to our gate weave, and the gate weave is gonna add a kind of camera shake effect to your shot. I like to keep it subtle once again, so I'm gonna keep it where it is and maybe half it. It's also gonna zoom into your image a little bit when you select this gate weave option. Now we have our last two effects here, which is gonna be our Overscan and Vignette. I find these two effects to be a little bit more of an acquired taste. I only like to use the Overscan effect for social media, for example, or if I was to create a flashback segment in a short film, maybe I would use this to emphasize that flashback, vintage, old school feeling. I will show you which options we have here. So we have the Super 35 mode, Super 8mm, Standard 16, Super 16, Ultra 16, Widescreen 35, and Ultra Panavision 65. I prefer the Super 35 option because I think it's the most simple, straightforward. And now we can adjust our gate shape. We have the sharp option, which gives it a more square appearance, rounded. I like to keep it at the neat normal. And then we can adjust our perforation mode, which is gonna be these film leaders here. If you wanted to choose the negative option, you can simply raise your exposure if you wanted to see the film leaders more or less. I personally like to keep the film leaders off, so I'll turn my perforation mode off. And film orientation is another option you have, but I don't personally use it. I keep it at vertical. The next thing we can do with Overscan is turn off the static gate option, which is gonna add some movement to the Overscan border here, as you can see. But I like to keep it static. And finally, I love when the Overscan border is pretty soft, so what we can do is move this gate defocus slider and it becomes a lot softer. It's pretty cool. Lastly, we have Vignette, and I'm not too fond of the Vignette in Dehancer. I usually prefer to use either Davinci's Vignette or Serre's Vignette tool, but I will show you how I would use this anyways. So if you select the mask mode, you'll be able to see your vignette size and aspect ratio. Let's do maybe like this. You won't be able to see feather or exposure unless you get out of mask mode. So I'll bring the feather all the way to the left so you can see. And then exposure, bring it down. This is our before and this is our after. Now, one thing that's weird about these two X and Y tools is that you can't press down and drag it back and forth to change your value. You have to manually guess which value to put. So I finally learned that I think 0.1 moves it to the right. I usually have to guess this a lot. Let's try 0.2. All right, cool. And then I think that looks good. It's our before and this is our after. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this shot. Now let's say that I really liked the way I did these settings and I want to apply it to the rest of the shots that had the same white balance or the same lighting condition. I can use the grab still function again and I can apply it to the rest of my clips. As you can see, you're definitely gonna have to make some adjustments, maybe to your exposure or some other settings. In this case, the shot is too underexposed with these settings. So what I can do is simply raise my exposure in the print tab, raise the exposure, and maybe bring down the black point a little bit. And then let's say I wanna add some more halation, I can do that here. Maybe I'll do a no remjet option. This is our before and this is our after. Cool. And same thing with this clip here. With our previous settings, it's really green, really yellow. I want to fix that, so I can go into my color head and make some adjustments. Maybe bring back some magenta, some cyan, and this is our before and this is our after. Very subtle. And that's pretty much it. So we can basically just keep making adjustments to the rest of our clips that way, or we can start each clip from scratch. So I hope that gave you a basic idea of how I like to use Dehancer. Now, will I continue to use Dehancer for my future projects? Absolutely. While I still plan to keep Ser Villasano's Film Vision Power Grade in my toolkit as I have in the past, Dehancer is perfect for getting everything done all in one place, and also granting me a little bit more flexibility in those areas such as film grain and halation. I've personally learned so much about film from this plugin alone that I didn't even know about before. Now, before I wrap up this video, I want to quickly highlight how I've been using the Dehancer iOS app over the past few weeks. It's been an incredible tool for achieving the same cinematic look I create with the Dehancer plugin in Davinci, only now I can do it on the go. The app gives me access to all the key features I rely on, like halation, film grain, and film profiles, right at my fingertips. Everything I demonstrated today, whether it's adding those film profiles or refining halation, can be easily applied to photos using the Dehancer app, making it a seamless extension of my workflow. If you have any questions about Dehancer Pro or the Dehancer iOS app, feel free to drop them in the comments and I'll be very happy to answer the best I can. Thanks again for watching my longest video ever, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.